that will just come in a theme for Drupal 8. So to start off, the .info file. So it's now YAML, just different file formats. You have your name, description, base theme, which is very important, and I'll show that in the next slide. Screenshot, nothing crazy. Libraries is something new in Drupal 8, which is very colorful. It took me a while to understand it, but it's amazing. It's the short version. And then you can define regions. So same thing as Drupal 7, you have regions, put blocks in regions. So base themes, you have two options. You can have stable, which is no markup, it's never going to change, and you're not going to have any classes in there. It's going to be bare bones. Or you can use classy, and that's going to have naming convention for the classes. I'll explain that in a second. If you don't have a base theme, you're going to have a bad time. With Drupal 8, 8.2 coming out soon, new features and functionalities will be in there. If you don't have a base theme, you can end up in a situation where your markup changes, the template files and core change, and then your theme will break. So no matter what, choose a base theme.
You mean a base theme in core?
Yeah, so core can have more base themes added to it. So this is theme.libraries.yaml file. So libraries is a new idea in Drupal 8 where you define different libraries. And this is your JavaScript and your CSS. And so there's two libraries in here, or three libraries. You have global styling, and you make a reference to global styling in your .info file. And then you define all of the individual CSS files, and you can also say different dependencies. So instead of including Google font, it's at the bottom here, you can't see it. At the bottom, font family Lato. So you can include external font families in your libraries file. In Drupal 7, I ended up doing this in my HTML template file. This is a way that you can have different font families, external files there. Notice that there's different media queries that you can include in here. And then also you can include JavaScript files. So just looking back here at the .info file, it has the two libraries that are called Pistachio Global Styling, Pistachio Global Scripts. And those will just be on every page. You can also add JavaScript or CSS files via a preprocessor hook, or you can add it directly in your Twig template files. And I would suggest the Twig template files because Twig template files are amazing. They're much easier to use than Drupal 7's template files. And that's probably the best thing that I've seen about Drupal 8 so far, is that template files make sense for me. So the theme.settings.yaml file, these are just the default settings used by your theme when you install it. So before this was in your .info file, so all of that just got moved to theme.settings. So should the user picture be in there by default? The logo path. What's awesome about Drupal 8 is that there's configuration management. You go to that admin config development URL, and it'll show you all of the configuration that you can export from your site. You can export that from one site, move it into another, or you can put it into a custom module, or in your theme. You can export it to code, which is just mind-blowing for me. You don't have to use features. You can actually use features for creating a feature instead of exporting configuration, which has been a big pain point for people in Drupal 7. The theme.theme file, Joe this morning mentioned how this got changed. I was overjoyed by this change because it was very confusing for me, especially explaining to new people. So you can create variables to use in Twig templates. This is an example of the hook preprocess node. And so just creating a new variable or adding a new class, pistachio node. This is adding in a library, so the normalize. library is being attached here, so this is one option that you can do. And then adding a new variable, pistachio. And at the bottom there is Kint variables, which I'll explain in a second. One thing with Drupal 8 is it's using them for CSS class names, which is awesome. With the mega theme, I got into situations where I was using important and using 5 levels of classes, which is not good for maintaining your CSS. So that is a different way of doing it. It's not a Drupal thing, it's just a front-end theming thing. So here's a little Vim code snippet. This is not Drupal, but the first example is using 2 different classes to try and specify what you're going after. The idea with Vim is you have ID specificity, but you're using classes instead. So this makes it much easier to reuse code, and you're not having to override other CSS style. So the B stands for a block. This is not a Drupal block, but a component of your code. So this is site search is the example for this. Element is, in this, you can see a site search field would be an example of an element. Another example is site search button. So each element would get its own class name, and you wouldn't reuse these in other places. The last one is modifier, and site search full is an example of a modifier here. So this would be if you have some JavaScript interacting with this, or if it's full, or if it's, I'm trying to think of something else, or maybe it's a search block instead of search full. Those would be 2 examples of using modifier. Also in Drupal 8, there's snacks. This is an optional way of organizing your CSS files. So one of the things that I've struggled with is how to organize my CSS files to make it easy to maintain it. Having one CSS file is not good. Having a page that has 20,000 lines of CSS, I've done it. It's a nightmare. You'll have CSS, or you'll have classes, multiple places in your code, and what you end up doing is you just add new CSS to the bottom of the file, and it continues to grow. So what they've done, and some themes in Drupal 8 have done, is that they've organized it using this Max way of organizing your CSS files by base, layout, components, and theme. So the base is just no classes or anything. Normalize is one of them in there, but base is where you have what an H2 looks like, what a list looks like, just all the normal things you would have. Layout is where you would have the grid component of your theme. Components, these would be the individual components on your site. If you have a hero slide, if you have a call to action, each individual component would have its own, if you're using Sass, you would have multiple files. So, and some themes that I've worked with or I'm building, I have 50 files in the components folder. They're very, very short CSS files, or they're actually Sass files. And Sass is name dropping preprocessor for CSS. So you're able to do computer coding logic in your CSS files, so you can use variables. You can have loops. You can have functions, so you can reuse your code. The biggest one for me is to break out all of your CSS files in different folders. So that way, when I try and find something, it's very easy to find a component. I have 50 files, but I can find the one that I want, and they'll all aggregate down to one file. Drupal also does that, but this is something that makes it easier for me to maintain, so I don't have a library that includes 50 CSS files. So in my theme, I would just have one CSS file for my library. So with JavaScript, there's a new use strict, which is JavaScript behavior. This is not anything Drupal particular. Otherwise, it's par for the course. Nothing groundbreaking has changed. Just there's Drupal behaviors, which I'm not sure if anybody uses these, but they're very powerful and confusing when you first start out using them. But using Drupal behaviors, you can tap into leveraging Drupal to do custom work for your site. The anonymous closure wrapping function is just the jQuery wrapper, so that way if you want to use a different library, you don't have to use jQuery for the dollar symbol. So templates, Twig. So Twig is a template language. So there's 3 different ways of writing Twig, and I just have them here. So you can print stuff, you have comments, and then loops. And one of the big things that I like is that all the templates are in one place. So the core theme classy templates folder has all 101 templates. You can see the numbers for them. There's a lot of template files. This is something in Drupal 7. All of them were in the individual modules. And so the front-enders, Morton DK was one of them, who went through and they organized everything into classy in different folders. So form, views, field, to try and make it easier for you as themers to not waste hours of your life trying to figure out where is this template file. And a big thing that they did was they allowed you to debug which template file is being used. So these 3 files, you just edit them. And this is what you add to your development.services.yaml file. So Twig config, you debug it, so true. The auto reload and cache are some other nice to haves. The settings.local.php, you don't have to update that. It's just another nice to have. There's some notes if you're looking at these slides online in the comment below, so just know that's what that is. But what the Twig config debug does is it adds this to generated HTML. So maybe a little bit hard to see, but it says the file name suggestions up here. So the X is the Twig file that's being used, node.html.twig. And it tells you where it's being loaded from. So themes, pistachio, templates, node, HTML, twig is where it's being loaded from. And this is amazing. I wasted hours trying to figure out what template file is being used. And now it's just baked into core. You add twig config debug true, and you get this. And it also tells you what you can call it. So node full, you don't have to remember if it's 2 hyphens, 2 underscores. You don't have to find that one page in Drupal.org documentation where it explains this. I've literally wasted hours, days of my life trying to figure this out, and I've made look like a fool. Because what are you talking about? Don't know where the template file is? Kint is the new DPM. So DPM was a function that would output variables. Instead of doing printr or printf in PHP, you would use DPM, and then that would have formatted the variables for you and helpful information. Kint is the new one. So just Kint content.body will output information like this. And this has all of the stuff that you could ever want. Just watch out. Kint will output a ton of information. So you may need to up your INI and PHP INI settings, so that way you have a lot of memory at your disposal, and just be careful if you try and Kint the entire node, your browser will probably crash. I'm amazed. Like, there's actually an issue on Drupal.org to be able to limit how many nesting times you can go. Right now, the default is 7. They're trying to have that as a variable so you can change it. So your browser doesn't crash. But Kint is just bundled with the devel module. So if you ever need to see what variables do I have out there for me in a template file, use devel and use Kint. So what does an actual twig file look like? So this is the block.html.twig file from Pistachio. I edited it a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But up here, it's just a twig block, just a twig function that you're creating a variable classes, and you're adding all these classes there. So I added the number of the hyphens in there so you could tell which one was doing what. Here's where you're setting the classes, and you're adding them to the div, and that's it. You can sort of see how there's some loops, and this is the output. So it has a block hyphen hyphen pistachio 1, 2, 3, system main block. So this is what twig does. An example of chaining. So if you want to add a class, that showed up above. If you want to remove a class, so if there is a module out there that's setting a class that you don't want, well, you can just remove class, whatever the class is. You can set attributes, IDs, titles, whatever you want. You can use Twig to chain that together. So this is the exact same Twig block. I just added some chaining to it, and that will put it. Preprocess node. This is something that is in your theme file. And this is just where you set variables, where you can set variables. So the variable pistachio, super awesome. And then this is how it's being used in the node.html.twig file. If pistachio equals super awesome. And this is straight up from the pistachio theme file. Twig block. So in Drupal 7, if you had HTML front page or page front, so on the home page of your site, you want to do something strange to your page.html file. You would have to copy that file and have duplicates of the entire file. And then when you have to update something in one of them, you have to update 2 files. So what happens when you have 10 copies of the same file? Just little customizations. In Drupal 8, there's twig blocks. So you don't copy the entire template file. What you do is, in block.html twig, you just say block custom text and block. And then in a separate file, the one that you would have a copy of the entire file previously, now you just have a custom code. So I'm just saying I'm extending this block. So I'm extending the previous block, and then I'm just adding some custom text. And here I can use the same variables I would in block.html.twig. So it allows you to create just individual blocks, and it makes your parent file much easier to maintain. Does this make sense? Any questions on this? Filters. Twig has a lot of filters. In Drupal, you can do, if you're displaying content to the field, so if you just did curly brace, content, it would just upload the content. This would be without a field, just one field. There's some Twig filters, like uppercase, strip tags. Some of the Twig filters don't work. So like Jess in her Drupal security hat, Drupal security doesn't want you to output some format because security implications, security issues, there we go. So if you want to blame somebody, blame Drupal security. Well, they're also the ones making sure that our sites don't get hacked, so be nice. But just, there's a link for Twig. There's a lot of filters. Try them out. If they're not working for some reason, there could be a Drupal filter on that. So component libraries, this is something new. That would be Drupal 8 or 8x maybe, or it may not be in Drupal at all. So for an output of the page, you need 3 things: JavaScript, CSS, and some HTML. Right now, all of them are separate, but should they be? And this is something about how to architect your theme. So in Drupal 8, it doesn't care where your twig files are. It doesn't care where your CSS and JavaScript files are. So if you wanted to, you could have a JavaScript file, a CSS file, and a twig template for each of your components, because you need all of those to function. And what you would do is you would have an automated script in the backend that would generate a style guide for you. So everybody's probably seen websites out there that show a style guide for their sites. And you could use gulp or grunt to generate a style guide based on your components. And so there's a project out there, components, and a node link for fun reads. I'm not sure if this will happen in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, but it's something interesting to see what's happening in the future. So, anybody have questions? I went through stuff pretty fast because I want to show something else. Anybody questions now? Okay, wis.edu clone. So hopefully everybody has seen the new wis.edu site. John, is he still here? No, okay. So John was here, and he was one of the people that created this. I think it's a really nice site. I looked at the back end, or looked at the HTML source, and I'm like, hey, couldn't that be Drupal? So, here we go. So, it's something that, look at this. Before I mention all of those twig debugs, so this is Drupal 8. What I did is I took the CSS and JavaScript that they have on the page, I just reused it. And then I went through and used the same markup that they did for the HTML and CSS and changed it up a little bit. So one of the new things that they did is they added a new photo. Okay, so I just created a new slideshow node.
CSS itself?
2 hours. Most of it was me trying to learn it, and now I'm just trying to open it up, which is taking way too long. I literally just saved it down to my computer. I didn't do much at all. Sorry, trying to do it. So what I did was I downloaded, so they notified their CSS file, and so I just took the same file, compressed it so I could understand it better. They also had a JavaScript file, did the same thing. And then all the things that I did was in twig files. So for the HTML file, all I had to do was add this top menu overlay file to match up with theirs.
Oh, so you took the existing CSS, didn't actually change the CSS to have its definitions match your theme, you just configured the theme to use the same definitions the
Yeah.
existing CSS was already using?
Yeah. So it's something that I wanted to see how much I could use their stuff.
Right.
So for this, I use stable as a basing theme. So I didn't use any CSS markup. So with stable, I didn't get any class names since I wanted to use theirs. I added the CSS and JavaScript libraries. And so added their JavaScript file and styles. I'm sorry. This was the UW one, so there's CSS and JavaScript. And then I created some of my own. So with Drupal, it needed a couple of core files. In the theme, I'm not doing anything. One thing that I did add was added breakpoints. So in Drupal 8, it has responsive images in core as a module. It's not enabled by default, but there's a new picture element. So the new picture element, HTML5, it allows media queries, so that way if you're on a small device, you don't have a large image. So you can create your own image styles per breakpoint. So if you want to have, when you're on desktop screens, an aspect ratio that's a rectangle works really well. If you're on small screens, that big image isn't going to make sense. So having it cropped so it will be a smaller image may make more sense. So Drupal 8 out of the box, you can create your own image presets, and then it has many different source files. And so these are the ones that have many media queries in there. It has min width of 440 pixels, and it's 1x. So you can also specify if it's 2x, 1x, depending on if it's a high def screen or not. So with this, you're not loading too large of images, you're just loading as big of an image as you want. And that's what breakpoints does. So here in my templates folder, I broke out the templates that I was using by homepage hero, so I created a new folder in there. And these are all the templates that I'm using in the homepage slider. So I'm using views for that. And so I literally just copied the code that they were using, the HTML, found that I needed to add some wrapping around each loop. So I added the markup that they were using, and then displayed my content inside of there. So it worked out really well that I could reuse their HTML. I didn't do the entire page, I just used the first fold, so everything slideshow and up I used. One of the things that I did run into is that Drupal views is great, except if you don't want everything, you have to remove a bunch of extra stuff. So this file, there's next to nothing here, just displaying the slideshow image link. So it's sort of overkill, but I wanted to have it custom and use their markup. This file, the main reason why I updated this one was to add a class, WWP slick, and also I wanted to remove an extra div. So with views, it wraps things in divs and more divs. Drupal 8 is much better than Drupal 7, and you can limit them. But there are some that I had to override a template file to get rid of a div. Normally I wouldn't have done that, but the CSS files, it required to not have that div, because they were using a greater than in the CSS. So since I wasn't touching the CSS, I had to touch the HTML. But with this, all I'm doing is adding classes, and then I'm displaying the text here. So nothing too crazy. For the menu, so the main menu, sort of notice what I did up here. I just added the markup that they had. HTML, CSS wasn't too much. And then added 2 classes there. And so with the twig output, letting you know which file names are being used, and template suggestions, really powerful, very nice to use. One of the issues that I did run across with this, and I'm not sure if this is a views thing. Oh, it is a views thing. But with the picture element, I couldn't use a picture element inside of the views rewrite field. Drupal was stripping out the picture element and the comment in there, so it was only spitting out the image element. So I'm not sure if that's a filter that Drupal has in there. That's something that I need to look into more. So my workaround for that was so what I did instead is I just was showing the content, full content. Otherwise, if I was doing fields, so this is showing both fields. So the top one is just the image. It's just finished yet. Okay. So the first image is this slideshow image field. I'm using the responsive image formatter. So this is the Drupal 8 module and core. The second one is, I'm just using a global custom text and I'm rewriting the results using the replacement patterns. So first one, you can see that it's using picture element, which is what I wanted to use. But when I would rewrite it, it would just strip out the picture element. So that's something you just gotcha with views. Watch out with that, and glad I'm not crazy and found that. So that's all I have with Drupal 8 theming. Main takeaways, I would say, is things have moved around a little bit, but it's much easier to theme in Drupal 8 because you have Twig and all the template files in one place. Debugging, I'd say, don't get anything out of this. Just remember that debug code snippet, and hopefully Drupal 8 theming will be much easier. So, any questions?
Can I ask you a question about Zerb?
Sure.
In your experience, because I know Zerb is used like on Drupal and WordPress and some others, correct?
Yeah.
Is a theme developed on top of Zerb for Drupal portable to WordPress?
Yeah. So Zerb is just like
the same
Bootstrap.
base, right?
Yeah. So the Drupal 7 Zerb Foundation is the 5x branch, and it has front capabilities baked in, so everything is CSS based. So you change a couple of variables in one file, and it spits out a bunch of CSS for you. And you should be able to reuse that in whatever. Just that one file you need to take over.
And then one other thing, if you had to convert the Wisconsin theme for real from the existing theme on the homepage to Drupal, would you take the same approach? Would you start by getting the theme to align with the existing CSS, or would you alter the CSS to match the existing base theme?
I'd probably alter the CSS to match base theme. It's something that it works, just not ideal. It'll probably be faster to just change the CSS, because there's some things that, I guess, I think the look of this site looks really nice, and the functionality is really nice, but the way that it structures things isn't the way that Drupal wants it to be structured.
So just like, okay.
So like, there's things nested inside of the menu, and to insert some code in there, it would take some doing. But to just change the CSS to match the DOM structure that Drupal generates by default, probably be easier in my mind.
But you were still able to basically reuse most of that existing asset. So all the CSS files, images, the JavaScript, and basically just reuse it and map it to Drupal.
Yeah.
Either way.
So just the slideshow warm-up I stopped because just proof of concept.
That's not bad for 2 hours.
So, yeah. But it was cool just trying to step through somebody else's HTML and cursing at Drupal, having an extra div in there. You can feel other people's pains when they look at my websites.
I just think it's pretty powerful you're able to do it that much that quickly. By basically just changing how Drupal is defining itself.
Yeah. Truthfully, it's somebody that knows more about Drupal 8 theming, like once they're more comfortable with it, because this is the most that I've dug into template files, probably be able to do it faster. The hard work is coding this. And so I've talked to John a little bit beforehand, and you were part of the team that did this. Writing that is tough.
Right.
From the mock-ups to an actual HTML. And then once you have the different components of like this hero slider, then if you just have the HTML, just JavaScript just works.
Yeah, I think that's some of the fear that I run into a lot of times is people, especially if they've gone through a relatively recent design, so much in creation of those assets. And so there's a real opportunity, I think, that if it's good enough, because when they could also invest in something that's not good, but if it's well structured enough, to be able to bring that and sort of map it to Drupal is a pretty powerful story.
Yeah. I guess going back to which one's easier for maintenance, probably easier to match Drupal's markup to the CSS file. So that way, whenever there's a new update in the original assets, you don't have to recreate, be like, oh, what did they change, and then implement that same change to your CSS. And of course, I used the Atlas theme that Olabot put out there. It's put up on GitHub, and it's a bare bones theme. So it's just a starter theme for Drupal 8. It has all the libraries in here, and what's cool for it is it has Gulp baked into it. So Gulp and Grunt are two just task managers. So okay, so I'm just in my theme folder, I'm running Gulp. Never do live demo. Anyways, what it's supposed to be doing is, there we go. So it reads this gulp_file.js, and it will look at all the files that you ask it to. So I have it looking at my SAS files, and it'll convert all of those down to one CSS file. It looks at the images and then compresses those. SVG, same thing. Minifies your CSS, and then it also has these watches. So if you're editing a CSS file, and you make a change, you'll notice the task manager just changed. So it's watching the SAS file directory and the JavaScript file directory. Whenever you save something, we'll recompress those again, the same task managers, and you can also reload your website using library load. You just speed up theme development. And you can do cool things like create a style guide that will just happen automatically when you're using Gulp or Grunt. Anything else?